All right, let's jump right in. We're about to open up a case file that's literally thousands of years old. And the main clue? An altar. Now, you might think, an altar, how complicated can that be? But as we're about to see, this simple object is at the very heart of a huge intellectual mystery, a real detective story played out by ancient scholars, trying to crack some seriously tricky puzzles.
So, what if this thing we think of as just a static religious object was actually, well, like a puzzle box? A puzzle that forced some of the most brilliant minds of the time to really wrestle with contradictions in their most sacred texts. And you know what? In the process, they came up with an amazing way to solve problems.
Okay, so our first case takes us way back to a place called Shiloh. This was the main spiritual hub for the Israelites, long before the famous temple in Jerusalem was even a thought. And the big question, the key piece of evidence, is the altar. Specifically, what was it made of? Sounds simple, right? Well, it's not. So the first detective to step up is a guy named Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he's got this really compelling theory. He's poring over the Torah, and he notices something. The word stones, when talking about building an altar, pops up 3 different times. So he thinks, hey, that can't be a coincidence. His conclusion? Each mention has to be talking about a different altar from a different time. And one of them, he figures, must be the one at Shiloh. I mean, it's a solid case, right? It's logical, it's based right on the text. But you know how it is in a good mystery. Just when you think the case is closed, bam! A new piece of evidence drops that just messes everything up. A huge plot twist. And this one involves something pretty incredible. A fire that came straight from heaven. Okay, so here's the problem in a nutshell. On one side, you've got this really strong argument for a stone altar at Shiloh. But on the other side, there's this super well-known tradition that a divine fire, this special fire that started way back with Moses, stayed burning on his portable copper altar. And it supposedly stayed there the whole time, right up until King Solomon built the temple. You see the issue? Those two things just don't add up. Which brings us to the big, flashing lights question, how can the altar be made of stone if this divine fire only ever rested on the copper one? I mean, think about it. If they built a new stone altar at Shiloh, that heavenly fire should have just gone out, poof, hundreds of years before Solomon. But all the stories say it didn't, so we have a flat-out contradiction. What's going on here? Now, faced with a puzzle like this, a lot of people might just give up, but not these ancient scholars. No way. They did what any great detective would do. They came up with some seriously clever solutions to try and make all the pieces fit together. Let's check out 2 of their best ones. Okay, solution number 1 comes from Rabbi Natan, and honestly, it's just so smart. He basically says, hold on, why are we thinking it has to be either copper or stone? Why not both? He comes up with this hybrid idea. Imagine the original copper altar, right? But it's hollow. And they just filled it with stones. Boom! The structure is still copper, so the divine fire stays happy. But it's also filled with stones, which takes care of the verse about a stone altar. It's brilliant. It just makes both sides of the story work. Then you've got Rav Papa's solution, which is a bit more poetic, you could say. He suggests maybe the fire wasn't stuck in just one spot. He described it as being like a guest, an ushpiza. So, sometimes it would hang out on the main copper altar, but other times, maybe when a big offering was happening, it would kind of visit the new stone one. Maybe some sparks would fly over. It's this beautiful idea that things don't have to be so rigid, so all or nothing. There can be a little bit of flow between them. All right, so case closed on mystery number 1. But the story of the altar is far from over. Let's fast forward a few hundred years. We're in the second temple period now, and a brand new puzzle pops up. This time, it's not about what the altar's made of, it's about its size. And this one, believe me, is even weirder. Okay, so the basic facts seem simple enough. The altar in the first temple, Solomon's temple, was 28 by 28 cubits. But when the people came back from exile and built the second temple, they made it bigger. They expanded it to 32 by 32 cubits. Sounds like a normal renovation, right? Well, not so fast. This is where our next detective, a scholar named Abayai, walks in and just blows the case wide open. He points out something that seems obvious once you hear it. He says, look, back in the first temple days, the population was massive. They described it as being like the sand of the sea. But the community that came back to build the second temple, it was a pretty small group, a little over 42,000 people. So here's the paradox, plain and simple. More people, smaller altar. Fewer people, bigger altar. What is going on here? Why in the world would you need a bigger altar for way fewer people? It just makes no sense. A huge population was doing just fine with a smaller one, but this tiny group needs to build a bigger one? This is the core of our second mystery.
And just like before, the scholars didn't back down from the paradox. They came up with two totally different kinds of solutions. One is super practical, based on what was actually happening day to day at the temple. But the other one, well, that one's a deep dive into legal theory that completely changes what an altar hedon means.
So the practical answer comes from Rav Yosef. He basically says to Abaye, you're forgetting one huge thing. In the first temple, they had that divine fire from heaven doing a lot of the heavy lifting, burning up the offerings. But in the second temple, that fire was gone. The priests had to do everything themselves, all the burning, managing the wood, everything. It was a lot more work. So they needed more space, not for more offerings, but just to have enough elbow room to do the job. The altar got bigger because the effort got bigger.
Okay, now for the second solution. And this is where my mind was kind of blown. This idea suggests the size change had nothing to do with priests needing more space. It was all about a massive shift in legal thinking. They found the answer by going all the way back to square one, rereading one of the most basic verses in the Torah about how you're even supposed to build an altar.
Believe it or not, this whole giant debate came down to just a few words from the book of Exodus, an altar of earth. That's it. The question is, what does that really mean? For hundreds of years, everyone thought it meant one thing. But now, facing a totally new situation, the scholars of the Second Temple came up with a whole new way to understand it. So how did this little phrase change everything? Well, during the First Temple, an altar of earth was understood pretty literally. The altar had to be solid, filled with dirt and stones. No gaps, no tunnels underneath, nothing. But the Second Temple scholars looked at it and said, maybe it just means it has to be connected to the earth. That little change, that was like a legal earthquake. Suddenly, it meant you could build the altar over empty spaces or tunnels in the ground. And why was that such a big deal? Because under the temple floor, there were these special channels for liquid offerings, libations they're called. This new legal interpretation meant they could actually make the altar bigger so it would cover those channels. Then they could just pour the liquids right into special holes on top of the altar. It's kind of poetic, really. They said now the altar's drinking could happen in the same place as its eating. And that's why it had to be bigger, to cover those channels.
So, there you have it. We've cracked two ancient cases about an altar. But look, this story is about so much more than just ancient history. The real point here isn't about stone or copper or even heavenly fire. It's about a whole way of thinking. I mean, when you really get down to it, what we've just walked through is this incredible masterclass in problem solving. These scholars didn't run away from contradictions. They leaned right into them. They saw them as a chance to find a deeper kind of truth. It's like they had this timeless intellectual toolkit. Step 1, you dig into the evidence, every single word. Step 2, you don't ignore the problems, you actually look for the contradictions. Step 3, you get creative and come up with solutions that somehow make everything fit. And maybe the most important step, you have to be willing to go back and rethink the most basic rules to deal with new situations. So here's the final thought to leave you with. This whole thing, this incredibly detailed debate, wasn't about being stubborn or rigid. It was the exact opposite. It was about finding the flexibility that's already inside a tradition to solve real-world problems. It's about honoring your past while being smart enough to adapt to the present. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? Where in our world today, with all the contradictions we face, could we use a little bit of that kind of thinking?